That's what's going on.
An attempt by nations of the world to reduce their population in anticipation of what's going to happen here later on with all of these catastrophes which are going to occur as a result of the passage of Planet X?
According the Zetas are asked this a lot, and they have said no, that there is nothing in the the vaccines that is intended to harm people. This, of course, was a route. If you go back into the early days of the Bush administration, when we had chemtrails that were actually making people sick, back into the 90s too. Chemtrails that would make people sick, they were experimenting on what would slow people down, make them, and every time they did the chemtrailing in the sky, people would be flooding into the clinics with something like a flu or various illnesses, and they were they were testing it out early, but the real plan, according to the Zetas, was to just flat out poison people. If the ultra-right group up in there in Utah didn't want the Crips and the Bloods down in L.A. to come thundering up into, Mormon country where everybody had supply of food to last for a year or whatever, they would just poison them as they were trying to migrate in that direction. So this was the original plan, but it expected that they could gain the cooperation of the U.S. military. When the U.S. military, according to the Zetas, when the U.S. military found out about this, they objected, and therefore chemtrails are now only being used to fog up the sky so you can't see Planet X. At least that's what's going on today. Then, of course, there was all this talk about vaccines that would just flat out poison people. There was one batch of vaccines that was coming from the UK. It was about 3 years ago, I think, or something. And all of a sudden they said, oh, bad batch, we have to throw the whole thing away. And everybody was saying, well, how could this happen, such poor quality control? What the Zetas said was they had actually created a batch which would kill people, because they were kind of anticipating that the Earth changes or the passage of Planet X might happen. And then when it wasn't passing and was taking its time, they said, well, we can't go and kill people en masse. The gig will be up. They'll see what we're up to, and trashed it instead. So, but the Zetas have said at the current time, Bush and Blair are no longer in charge, and this kind of thing is not happening. So that it's just a vaccine. The very real danger, of course, is that the swine flu vaccine in 1976 created 25 deaths from Guillain-Barré illness, which is a type of paralysis. It's an autoimmune response, is my understanding.
Right, and what a lot of people are fearing with this.
That's right.
vaccine.
And they had 25 deaths from that, but they had no deaths from the swine flu. So, overreacting is not likely to happen, especially because in the UK alone, there's an uproar now that there's no discussion about an untried vaccine being forced on people, or, not even forced, offered to people. And the last swine flu vaccine was a disaster. And I can speak from experience. I had Guillain-Barré when I was 23, totally quadriplegic, not from a vaccine. It was one of these, I think there's an association with overworking. I physically overworked. Everyone I ever heard of that got it, that I went to visit, did some sort of massive physical pushing their body, overworking. One woman painted every room in her house, for instance, that kind of thing. And ahead of time. And this is also what makes you susceptible to polio. So they don't really know what causes it. Some say an autoimmune response, some say it's a virus. But anyway, I became totally could not eat, could not drink, could not breathe for like 3 weeks after, and it took me just years to get back, on my feet and walking around. I still have a weakness from it. It was a horror.
Nancy, there's going to be this natural reaction among people when they, like in the UK, where we mentioned that a lot of the media news organizations yesterday reported that the government is preparing mass burial plots for the victims of the swine flu. And then, of course, the report coming out in this country of 90,000 or more people are going to die from this. What is the purpose behind spreading these reports, whether they be true or not? And if they're not true, then why are you spreading them into the public and creating this artificial fear?
Well, I think it's the patterns in the past, where we've had, was it very, very reputable people talking about, that there were plans to create pandemics. We've had microbiologists who have died off in extraordinary numbers by quote-unquote accidents, and enough of this, as I mentioned, with the release of the 1957 virus from a U.S. lab in 2005 and the Baxter lab slip up in Austria just last December, that combined says somebody's planning a pandemic, and then of course the release of this swine flu in Mexico, clearly engineered, just virtually screams that's in process. So it seems to be hand in hand. Not only do you get rid of excess population with a pandemic, but you get rid of them by a forced vaccine. Naturally, people would think of this, right?
Was this a government initiative, or was this something that the terrorists got a hold of and decided this is what they're going to do?
Yeah, and when we're talking about terrorists, we are not talking about a bunch of Arabs with box cutters. We are talking about the elite. The wealthy, the powerful, those who run the world today, the royalty, those who consider that they are somehow, supposed to be in control of the world, and anybody else, the poor, the worker class, etc., they are disposable. They are there as their personal slaves somehow. These are the people who are arranging for this, and not all of them either. I'm not saying they work as a group, but that's where this comes from, because it takes money to do this kind of stuff.
Okay, well, if that's the case, then who's to say that the elite themselves are not going to be infected by the virus?
That's right, and that's what happened with AIDS. According to the Zetas, well, AIDS was from the CIA going into Africa and taking what was known to be in the apes and getting people, to drink blood and have of the apes and have sex or whatever and get it started to where it was spreading among people. And the whole idea was probably to take out many black people. There's a lot of prejudice against that race around the world, but also homosexuals, who have what you might call unsafe sex. So that it was, they were targeted. They were targeted minorities, and let's see if we can sculpt the world's population to our liking, right? And by creating this epidemic, but it got out of hand. It started infecting white people, and would go right up into the middle class homes or upper middle class homes of the wealthy, and through many avenues, tainted blood, drug use, where you have intravenous drug users of all the classes.
And that's pretty much what we're seeing here, because it's 60% of all those that have been infected thus far are young people between the ages of 16 and 25, I believe.
Right. So and same thing with the Ebola infections. They were trying to work that as something that they could use to selectively wipe out, area. But it got out, as Zeta said, they came home and died, around Langley, sitting in, the people that were supposed to be the virus handlers would get infected, and they couldn't contain it, and so they gave it up, But nevertheless, yes, there were people that was a thought, and has been a plan a long time. We're probably seeing some results of this, but just because it's somebody's plan doesn't mean it's going to pull off.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens. We'll wait and see what happens this fall, because so much has been predicted with this virus, and we'll see how accurate the government is in telling us the truth about what's developing with this virus.
Yeah, but I just don't think we're going to get a mandatory vaccination until they've had some test subjects and they know how safe the vaccine is, whether they're going to have Guillain-Barré incidents again, et cetera. And I don't think it's ever going to be mandatory. I think it's going to be optional. I really do.
Well, I hope you're right, Nancy, because if it's the latter, we're gonna have some real chaos on our hands here in this country.
Right.
A lot of people are very fearful about taking this.
That's right.
This vaccine. But we're running out of time, but I want to thank you so much for coming on the show once again. And of course, I realize that the hourglass is ticking and things are changing quickly. But as always, I wish you the best in your endeavors and hope to have you back again at some future date.
Yep, I hope so too, because it's always a pleasure.